Welcome back to Headline. We're talking about the employment insurance program and what can be done to fix it or change it or do nothing. Labor unions, of course, have their own take on what needs to be done to fix the EI system. Joining us now is Erin Weir. He's a senior economist from the United Steelworkers. Well, Erin, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me.
What do you see that's needed in the EI system?
Well, right now there's 1.5 million Canadian workers that are officially unemployed. Fewer than half of them actually receive employment insurance benefits. So the first thing that needs to change is that benefits need to be provided to more unemployed workers, both as a matter of fairness to people who are being laid off through no fault of their own after having paid employment insurance premiums. The other point, though, I'd make is that enhancing employment insurance is a very efficient mechanism of delivering stimulus dollars to the households and to the communities that have been hardest hit by the economic crisis.
Now, you say half the people unemployed aren't getting UI. Is that because they're not they're ineligible because they were part-time or self-employed, or why is that?
Well, it's a variety of different reasons, but yeah, in many cases it's the fact that seasonal or part-time workers simply haven't accumulated enough hours of paid work to qualify for benefits. Even workers who do qualify have to wait for 2 weeks arbitrarily before getting benefits, and they also need to exhaust whatever vacation or severance pay they have before receiving benefits. So there's a lot of barriers to actually getting the benefits to which people should be entitled when they're laid off.
Now, what about that, Monte Solberg? I know the government, when you were there, was looking at self-employed people and trying to get them into the system as well. What about some of those type of changes?
Well, first of all, with respect to the 2 weeks, I think most insurance programs do have a bit of a barrier so that people don't go and abuse the system. I think it's wise to keep that in there. I think there is an expectation too that people should provide to some degree for themselves for their savings. So most insurance programs, I think, anticipate that, and I think employment insurance should be like that as well. In terms of the self-employed, I think the government has a point with regard to this, but the challenge again is there's a number of challenges with that, including really identifying has somebody been caused to be unemployed because they lost a contract, their only contract with a company, and that's really forced them into unemployment? Or is it something else? Maybe they've done something to terminate this contract themselves, and then we'll just get benefits. And we need to think these things through. It's not an easy thing to do, but there are a number of people that don't get unemployment insurance. But I really have to disagree with Erin on this. I think in some cases people aren't entitled to it. A lot of people
even if you pay into it.
Well, people in some cases pay into it, but then receive it year after year after year. And there's many cases, for instance, in Atlantic Canada, especially, where people will work 10 weeks or 12 weeks of the year and receive EI benefits for the remaining 40 weeks of the year and do it year after year after year.
Not just there, though. I mean, we had for years here, the auto companies would lay people off for X weeks, X months, knowing they could claim EI as well. They use the system in the same way, right?
Yeah, true. But I'm using Atlantic Canada because the regional benefits there are much different than they are in other parts of the country. And certainly it's only a very small portion of people in Atlantic Canada, for instance, that would be in that situation. But I think it is something that really is not fair, and I think it also retards the development of the economy in places like Atlantic Canada when you have a system like that.
Erin, what about that?
I would really say that concern is somewhat overstated. I mean, if we were in an economy where there was a severe labor shortage and there were a lot of job opportunities that were open, then perhaps yes, it would make sense to try to fine-tune the program to remove any possible incentives for people to stay on employment insurance benefits. But that's simply not the case right now. We're in a situation where there are far more workers than there are jobs, so we really don't need to worry about people
we shouldn't design the system for just addressing the problems of the recession. It should be designed to address the problems throughout the entire business cycle. And it wasn't very long ago where Prince Edward Island had an unemployment rate of over 10%. But you had labor shortages to the point where you had to bring in Russians to work in fish plants in Prince Edward Island because people would prefer to stay on benefits in some cases instead of go to work in fish plants. So it is a real problem, and it does create some perverse incentives.
Erin, what about the regional makeup? I mean, we're talking about Atlantic Canada, but there are 50-odd regions across the country, and benefits vary depending on where you are, depending on the unemployment insurance rate. I know the premiers in Western Canada have called for changes to that system. Others have as well. What do you guys think about that?
Well, really, we would, agree with Monte in that there should be a national standard in place. We think that the 360-hour threshold for entry into the program makes sense. We also think that up to 50 weeks of benefits should be available in all parts of Canada rather than just in the regions that have historically had the highest unemployment rates. So, I think it makes sense to have a national standard.
On the 360-hour thing, Monte Solberg made a good point that if you lower it to 360 hours from the current 400-odd hours, pretty hard to raise that when the recession's over, like the Liberals have suggested. Are you suggesting keep it at 360 hours?
Oh, yeah, I'm suggesting it as a permanent change. I think that, if you look back, say, in the early 1990s recession, about 80% of unemployed Canadians actually got employment insurance benefits. As I say, that's now down to below 50%. So we really do need to make benefits more accessible.
That's only 10 weeks of working, though. I mean, I could get 10 weeks of working and then get 19 or 20 weeks unemployment insurance.
Well, I think the assumption underlying that, though, is that you have a standard, full-time 40-hour work week. A lot of the people who are being denied employment insurance benefits are more part-time or contingent workers who actually do have a lot of trouble accumulating the 700 hours of paid employment that would be required in some regions of Canada right now.
Well, I would make a couple of points. First of all, 360 hours is a 45-day work year. Which I think most people would be a little shocked to hear that you could qualify for benefits for an entire year based on 45 days of work.
It wasn't an entire year. You'd only get benefits for 19 weeks or something.
Well, but Erin's proposing 50 weeks. But the other point I would make is, how do you pay for this? I mean, that would be an extraordinarily expensive program, meaning you would have to drive up premiums on both workers and employers. If you drive them up on employers, it's really you're increasing the tax on jobs, really making the problem worse again. So unless you're proposing to dig into general revenues, you're going to have to deal with the impact of these higher premiums on the people who actually go out and hire workers.
Well, for the past 10 or 15 years, the government of Canada was pretty happy to collect billions more in premiums than it had to pay out in benefits. It was able to put $50+ billion towards the national debt by doing that.
There's a huge surplus in the unemployment insurance.
Yeah, a colossal surplus, and I would say that now the shoe's on the other foot. Now is the time where it makes sense for the government of Canada to be willing to put more money into employment insurance benefits than it's able to collect in premiums.
Well, that's what it's doing right now, of course, and that's part of the reason that there is a deficit. That $50 billion was spent by the previous government. Our government, frankly, fixed that problem, but it didn't fix the $50 billion. That is still part of the previous government's legacy. I think the ideal is to have a fund that funds this without having to dip into general revenues.
Right, because as it comes now, all the premiums come into general revenues and can be spent anywhere they want.
Well, not now. The system that has been fixed.
Okay, so now it's a separate fund. If there's a surplus, it has to stay there.
That's right.
And if there's a deficit?
If there's a deficit, the government will dip into general revenues, and that's what they're going to have to do right now. But there is no requirement that the fund would actually owe that money back to the federal government.
Okay. Erin, last word to you. Do you have any confidence that this panel that's appointed by the government and by Michael Ignatieff is going to fix the problem or come to any reasonable solution?
Well, I hope it does. I don't have too much confidence. I mean, certainly we have a minority parliament, so anything's possible. I mean, the New Democratic Party and the Bloc Québécois support the kind of reforms the Labour movement has proposed. So certainly if the Liberal Party wants to get on side with any of those proposals, there's enough votes to pass them. But as long as Michael Ignatieff is kind of willing to back down, as he's done a couple of times now, there won't be a lot of pressure on the government to make meaningful improvements.
And the other two parties, of course, aren't on the committee either, are they?
Yeah, no, that's another problem. It's
all right, Erin, we got to leave it there. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, thanks for having me.
That's Erin Weir. He's an economist with the United Steel Workers Union. Coming up, we're going to get another perspective on the EI situation, this time from the C.D. Howe Institute. Stay with us.